Everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Super excited for everyone being here. Folks are going to flow in later. I know some classes go a little late on Thursdays, but we're super excited to continue this week. We've had some heavy hitters this week. We started off with our luncheon, our first ever Black History Month luncheon that we had a conversation with Jennifer Calfoy, who is a candidate for the Commonwealth of Virginia for the position of governor. So we're excited about that. And now here we are tonight with Dr. Tierney Bates, moderated by, a conversation is going to be moderated by Brianna Johnson. And so we're super excited, and I'm excited to have you all a part of this night. And so just to get things started, I am happy that our dean is here, Dean Brooke Berry, and she's going to give us a warm welcome, but also recite a beautiful poem by Langston Hughes.
Everyone, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Tierney Bates, for being here tonight. Dr. Tierney Bates is my former supervisor. He taught me a lot. He still does. So we're so happy to have you virtually, and I hope soon to have you in person to campus, because our folks need the treat that is the Tierney Bates experience. And so now I'm going to be reciting the poem by Langston Hughes, I Look at the World. I look at the world from awakening eyes and a Black face, and this is what I see. This fenced off narrow space assigned to me. I look then at the silly walls through the dark eyes and a dark face, and this is what I know, that all these walls oppression builds will have to go. I look at my own body with eyes no longer blind, and I see that my own hands can make the world that's in my mind. Then let us hurry, comrades, the road to find.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dean Berry. I love poems and I love Langston Hughes, and what a befitting poem to start off our conversation on tonight. I have the esteemed privilege to introduce to everyone one of my dearest students and one of my dearest friends. We've been through a lot together. Even COVID, we was quarantined together. We're not together, but we quarantined around the same time. And she's a great student. She's a fiery student, but very intellectual and very sharp. And so she's a junior at Marymount University here, majoring in information technology with a concentration in computer science and minoring in mathematics. Over this time at Marymount, she has emerged as a student leader, serving as our community assistant in the residence halls, a peer mentor in the freshman discovery courses. She's also an admissions ambassador for prospective high school students, and also the committee chair in Marymount University's SGA, which is Student Government Association. Aside from her work on campus, she finds many ways to immerse herself in the Washington metropolitan area and community. During her free time, Brianna also volunteers as a mentor to underserved youth in the Southeast DC area with the Washington Nationals Youth Baseball Academy. Wow, that's awesome. Brianna is an avid learner and an undergraduate student pursuing a degree and a career in the federal government upon graduation. So I'm super excited to introduce her as she kind of moderates this conversation and introduce our guests. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing amazing tonight and are enjoying their evening. Obviously, as Tate said, my name is Brianna Johnson. I'm a junior here, and I will basically just be moderating this event. I will be asking our guest speaker today a few questions, and I'll also be filtering any questions that are in the chat. So if anytime you have any questions, feel free to just put it in the chat or privately DM it to me. But I have the honor to introduce our guest today, Dr. Tierney Bates. He has established himself as a focused leader, a fundraiser, a networker, career coach, and a voice on equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and with Generation Now. He has over 20 years in higher education and has progressed from entry-level to senior-level administration, providing leadership and vision and responsibility for strategic initiatives and solutions in student services, diversity and inclusion, career services / the workforce development, recruitment, and fundraising. He is currently at UNC Chapel Hill as their Assistant Vice Chancellor for Special Projects and Interim Executive Director, and has served in leadership roles at Virginia Union University, North Carolina Central University, the University of Louisville, University of Tennessee, and Bowling Green State University. So please welcome Dr. Tierney Bates.
Thank you, Brianna. Thank you very much. It is an honor and a privilege to be with you guys this evening. I first of all want to start off with Brianna. I'm glad to hear that you're going to graduate and go get a good government job. As my grandmother used to say, if you get a good government job, you ain't got to worry about nothing. They got them good benefits. You got a job for 30 years, all that great stuff. But we know when you go in there into that good government job, you'll do some things that will be impactful about what we're going to talk about tonight around the power of activism. I'd like to thank you, Brianna, Tate, Dean Barry, for having me this evening, and all of Marymount University as a whole. This is a great time to us to have this discussion around the power of activism. It's also exciting because it is. We're celebrating Black History Month. I've seen your lineup of all the great people that you're bringing to Marymount University. Let's not just bring them during Black History Month, but let's bring them throughout the academic year as far as that is concerned. Dean Barry started off with Langston Hughes. And it's very interesting because Langston Hughes, I like Tate, love poetry. I used to write it. I probably need to get back to doing it in some regards as far as that's concerned. But I realized that most of our students might not even know who Langston Hughes is. When I think about our I generation, or Gen Z, as we like to call it nowadays, that are on our college campuses, do they know about not only Langston Hughes, but Zora Neale Hurston, Alain Leroy Locke, and all these other individuals that came out and have provided all kind of literature in this space we call higher education. And if we're not doing that at Marymount University to make sure that we have voices from different perspectives speaking in the classroom and not just teaching from a lens of Eurocentric ideation, we are doing a disservice to our students. So let's talk about it. Let's get into it tonight about the whole idea of the power of activism. And I told Brianna, I want this to be interactive. So I'm going to give you about a 15, 20-minute dialogue on where we are in activism right now and where we can go. And would love to ask her to ask me questions and you ask me questions as well as we move through this dialogue this evening. But first, I got to give you a history lesson. I'm a history buff. I love history. We know history can repeat itself. We know history is what has changed our society as a whole. And the first part of that history is I want to talk about the activism that we see today and where that basis comes from overall. A lot of us in the United States of America think of activism from the lens of the civil rights movement. But little do we know that the civil rights movement was born out of Mahatma Gandhi and what he did in India. The great person we all love to praise in the months of January and February, Dr. Martin Luther King, actually studied what Gandhi did to be talking about a nonviolent system and strategy of social change. So that's what Dr. King introduced to us in America in the 1950s, starting with the Montgomery boycott, was this nonviolent strategy for social change. And then we built up what we call the resistance. So as you fast forward through the years of the 60s, in the greatest period, there's been 3 great periods in our time in this country, particularly when I talk about policy, when I talk about inclusive, and the ability for people of color particularly to be able to be their best selves. That was after slavery from 1865 to 1877, when we talk about the Reconstruction era. At that point in time, more people of color owned their own land, owned businesses after coming out of slavery. Education for slaves went from 5% to 65% literacy rate. More schools as historically Black colleges were founded in that time frame than ever before at any point in history, letting us know that education was a great equalizer in the ability for us to really have some impact long term. Then you fast forward. Another period of time, of course, is the Roaring Twenties, as like people like to say, right before we get into this thing we call the Great Depression. And that was a good time frame because of throughout the country, you had built up your own, what we call Wall Streets. You had Tulsa, you had Durham, North Carolina, you had Wilmington, North Carolina. There were actually more than what we just read about today when it comes to Durham or when it comes to what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then 1963 to 1965, that nonviolent strategy for social change and resistance actually came to fruition when the legislative that we like to call Congress passed laws that should have already been what we alienated our rights already should have had. That was talking about the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act around discrimination and all other stuff. But what happened was people of color were particularly giving what rights they already had. But the biggest thing was, what were the things they had to deal with for years and years from that perspective? So you fast forward, and when we talk about activism, not only was it Dr. King, when he started, he was 26 years old, but all throughout history, young people have changed our society, specifically college students. So in the 60s, you get SNCC, you get the bus boycotting rides down into the South, led by John Lewis, Diane Nash, and that group as far as that is concerned. You get the February 1, as the good Dean Barry knows about, at North Carolina A&T State University, where 4 gentlemen decided to go sit at a Woolworth lunch counter and not give up their seat. See, it was students like that that took on the nonviolent realm and took it to another level. You fast forward, that whole college student movement in the 60s was huge, not only just for people of color, but also for our Caucasian brothers and sisters as well, because what happened in the 60s, we had this great thing called the Vietnam War come upon us, and people stood up for their rights. In that college student movement, you saw a labor movement where people were saying, finally, we're not just going to work for pennies on the dollars. We are really about the safety of people working in these certain jobs as far as that's concerned. You get a woman movement. Not only did you have a woman movement in 1919 when women finally got the right to vote, but you had a second generation of women who talked about feminism and how that was looked at and how that was designed. You had the start of the LGBT movement as far as that is concerned as well. We had a conversation to look at how at that point in time, there were still people in the closet, as we like to say, but there was a bubbling up of people starting to say, this is me, this is who I am, and we must be able to make sure that we create this inclusive environment. It's the first time you start getting African-American studies courses at institutions or ethnic studies around women, around Latinx communities. It is when Cesar Chavez steps up and says, for the migrant farm workers in California, we will not take this anymore. We farm your foods, yet we don't have the right homes or the ability to afford the things we need to take care of ourselves. We also see the great group led by my great fraternity brother, the Black Panthers, who did a great service in their communities, yet J. Edgar Hoover in the United States government will paint them as militant and against the government. They weren't militant and against the government, they were militant and against being beat up. And so it's important for us to understand, if you ever read anything on the Black Panther Party on their 10-point plan, they were about building the community that they were living in. And then you get the Guardian Angels, you get other organizations that are formed all by students. People don't know that Huey P. Newton had a doctorate degree. He was a student at the time going through processing and developing the Black Panther Party. So these are the things that students saw in the 60s and said, this is not right. So you have the nonviolent movement, and then you fast forward to what we get now is the 70s and then in the 80s, and we get the resurgence of students now trying to fight apartheid that's going on in the 80s as far as that's concerned. You get students fighting for the rights to be able to have shared governance at their institutions of higher learning. You fast forward, you start talking about policies in government overall. Students start realizing, wait a minute, some of these policies, some of these government things do not align as an institution with us as students. So you get that whole ideation that now it's not just about the faculty. As we say, as I've heard a lot of people say, if we don't have good faculty, you won't have the things you need in an institution. No, if you don't have the students and the power of the students, we don't have an institution. Faculty can come and go, and so do students, but students are why we are here. So when I look at my institution, when I look at Marymount University, I look at the students and I ask them, what are they doing to garner and engage their power of activism? We fast forward, we get into this whole idea of financial aid. Financial aid, 30, 40 years ago, most people could afford to go to college. As far as that is concerned, your Pell Grant, I know at least when I started, could cover most of your expenses. You might have to take out a small loan as far as that's concerned, where it's the total opposite right now. If you go to an institution, you're basically taking out a house note just to afford to go get a 4-year degree and then walk outside and walk into a $40,000 a year job and barely pay your student loan. We have this ability to understand that we now have to have dialogues as students of our power of activism, of how we are funding higher education as a whole. If there's anything I can challenge the students to think about tonight, is learn how your institution of higher learning is funded. What is the tuition and fees? What is the overarching cost to run Marymount University? We got to understand that also we get the ideation of clubs and organizations. So you get the Black Student Union, you get the Latin Student Union, you get the Women's Student Organization. You finally found in the last 20 years, we're finally comfortable with saying and developing our LGBT community organizations on our campuses. And in that, they fought for that stuff. They knew the power of being activists and saying that I belong at these institutions and you must be able to respect that and you must be able to put something in place for me to be here, is that power of activism. You got to understand that as higher education as a whole, we've had to deal with this whole thing called FIT, as I like to dismantle. See, FIT in higher education or inequality regimes are in the DNA of higher ed, nonprofit, corporate, and even the government, as you want to go work for, Brianna. Why? Because most of the laws, most of the policies that were in place were made without me in mind. An example of that, a lot of people talk about socialism and capitalism, communism, one of those isms in front of guard. This country was built on the backs of individuals that never had access to capitalism, never had access to true socialism, as far as I'm concerned. And here we are in 2021, having a conversation after the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and other individuals who've had to sacrifice their life for the rest of the country to open their eyes. Yet the same issues that are going on in 2021 were going on in 2000 when I was in school, was going on back in 1979 when other individuals were in school, and were going on back in 1968 when that student organization was founded at Marymount University. They're still going on. But guess what? We're hoping that we're passing on the torch through the power of activism, that we can make it better off for them when we are inherited, as far as that's concerned. We got to realize that FIT has to be destroyed in higher education. The type of student we recruit sometimes is not always the best. I've had the ability to work at 5 institutions, 2 historically Black colleges and university, and I'll tell anybody, I'll put those students up against anybody at Marymount, Harvard, Yale, you name it, MIT. Why? All they needed was an opportunity. You see, it's this thing called K through 12 education that we go through. And so K through 12 education in itself is divided. It's the haves and the haves not. But usually if you give a student the ability to grow within themselves from a pedagogy style, from able to learn at their pace, 9 times out of 10, they will be very successful. But it's also the societal issues they have to deal with. If I'm hungry and have to go to school, if I don't have the clothes to wear on my back when I go to school, when my mom is having to work 3 jobs just to pay the rent for all of us to live underneath one roof. These are the things we're not talking about in higher education, of how do we create these spaces where our students can truly show up, and how can we build the power of activism around that. We got to understand that the DNA of higher education as a whole, we've had inequality regimes. We've had this idea that if you don't fit a certain way as a student, we won't recruit you. I remember one time that I was applying to colleges, and most time it was open enrollment. It was open enrollment, and now we've got very, very selective. We've got these predictive analytics. How well will a student do when they get to Marymount? How will they do to UNC? And I'm a firm believer, if you give the students the right tools, whether they have come from a top school in the state or a low performing school in the state, if they have their internal resources, internal support, the atmosphere that says that they belong and creates that atmosphere for them to be able to thrive, it doesn't matter where they come from. So it's important for us to understand the power of activism that you have right now, Brianna, and any student on this call or any administrator, is to look internally at the homogenous culture you may have that is stopping from you being your best self. So it's important for us to understand overall that these FIT ideations need to go out the window, and we need to talk about the cultural ad of our students, the cultural ad of faculty, the cultural ad of our staff that come to work at Marymount University. Because that's going to be the difference between now and an institution of the future. If we're not preparing our students from a power of activism, not only to get through college, but from college to completion to career, and what does that mean? And having them define that, develop that, take classes around that. If we're not teaching interdisciplinary courses, it's important for us to understand we're doing our students a disservice. Now, when it comes to our BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color as a whole, is the terminology, as we know in this whole film around diversity, equity, inclusion, the terms change, things different. I tell people, when you do this kind of work around activism, when you do this kind of work around DEI, that it is a journey, it is not a destination, because it pivots, it changes, things change, our students change. We have now, everybody keeps talking about the millennials. The millennials are 40 years old. This is iGen. If you're 25 or younger, you're iGen, you're Gen Z. So millennials, yeah, they graduated years ago. They're in the workforce. They make up majority of the workforce currently right now, outside of Gen Xers and baby boomers. But right behind them is iGen, the students we have right now that are about to graduate, or the students we have right now in graduate school as a whole. And what are we doing? If you have not researched them, paid attention to them, they're the most diverse group. They do not want to work like mom and dad did as far as that is concerned. They realize that the things they're fighting for, they were the ones in the street last summer after the death of George Floyd. And it wasn't just people that look like me. They realized that we have to right the wrongs, the historical wrongs of our country as a whole. So it's important for us to understand that with the Power of Activism, I would challenge the students at Marymount University to have a conversation with your leadership, from the president to your VPs to Dean Barry and everyone like that. I would challenge you to bring your students together and have a dialogue around how do we support each other in clubs and organizations. An example of that is your fraternity and sorority life merge with your Black fraternity and sorority life, and how they partner and do programming together. We need to talk about how some organizations don't have enough funds to do some things, and how we need to talk about the equity and how that is done when we deal out money. We have to talk about what are the things SGA is working on as a whole that impacts all students, not just a subpopulation of students. And then we also have to talk about that, because at the same time, some subpopulations need a little more than others. We have to talk about that beautiful facility that you just opened up, yet we need to pour more money, more time, more resources into that facility, or into what we say we're going to do around diversity, equity, and inclusion at Marymount University. You see, a lot of schools right now are doing what I call performative acts. And it's up to you as students at Marymount University to hold us accountable. I'm a leader on the campus, and you hold me accountable, as I tell my UNC students. Because why? You have the power. Our Black students at Marymount have the power. Our women students have the power. Our Latinx students have the power. Our Asian Pacific Islanders, our LGBT students. That coalition coming together is so impactful. Yet we have to have conversations that what the LGBT student needs is different from the Black student. What the Latinx student is different from the Asian Pacific Islander student or the international student as a whole. Yet at the same time, we have to sometimes stand in solidarity and say, it's not my turn. I'm gonna let the Black students go first, and we're gonna get what they need. And then we'll step up as Latinx students or as international students. It is important for us to understand that the power that you have, Brianna, if you decided today, we're all leaving Marymount University, the school would shut down. One, they don't want the publicity. Two, you know the impact that you have on that institution. And as they go through enrollment management, because I've done enrollment management, and they want to recruit more students like you, Brianna, they realize that if Brianna is our greatest recruit, because if Brianna goes back to her high school, back to her community, and talks so much about Marymount, it gets other students thinking like, oh, I might want to go there. I might want to apply. They're offering me some money to go there. But Brianna could be that gift and curse for Marymount to say, don't go to Marymount. They don't believe in us. They don't invest in us. And yet you have a problem on your hands as an institution. The beauty of it is where you're located at right now is probably one of the most diverse areas in the country. But yet it's probably still divided in its own ways. It's not divided maybe by race, but it can be divided by social economics. It can be divided by the schools we send our kids to. An example of that, I live in Durham, North Carolina. The school and the city are totally different when it comes to ethnicity. The city is 72% white, yet the school system 80% Black. That tells me something. That tells me that people do not want to send their kids to school with my daughter. So what does that mean in our society as we segregate ourselves, yet we're saying, rah, rah, we're all about this great activism, we're all about this great coming together, kumbaya and everything like that. That means we have some work to do, internally and externally. It means that, Brianna, you need to step up and challenge all your students on your campus about the power they have. You need to go in front of the great, I think it's Irma is her first name, and say, here's our list of demands and what we want to do, and this is the things we want to see, and we're not waiting. And she knows that because she's a Latina. She can realize that it's important for you to understand that the things that students need is key and critical to every institution. Now, I know, I sit on the university administration side, and of course, we got to play the politics game. I know we got to go back and forth of what's right, what's wrong, what we can do, and what we can't do. But we know what we can do, and we know what we can do in a short or long-term goal. You see, any organization that truly wants to make internal change, truly have an impact, and truly listen to their students are going to do it. Why? Because the institutions of the future will be the ones that students will attend, will be the ones doing that work. It's one thing to go and say we're going to put all this stuff on paper, because that's what we do in higher ed. We're going to form a committee. I know Dean Barry's on that committee. We're going to form this diversity, equity, inclusion committee. You know what I'm saying? We're going to have a whole bunch of meetings, because that's what we do in higher ed. And we're going to talk about this, talk about that, talk about that. Then we're going to roll something out from our discussions, yet there's no accountability. There's no accountability for the deans. There's no accountability for the faculty. There's no accountability for the staff. There's no accountability. Yet we see, we'll put this in place and 5 years later turn back and say, well, why didn't we accomplish anything? Because there's no accountability. I say that because if we think about this as a whole, everything has changed for us in multiple different ways. This same discussion I'm having you with tonight, I was having 5 years ago. I was having 10 years ago in the field. Yet organizations will put out these different parameters and things that we want to address, and nothing changes. So I challenge you guys tonight to think about your power you have as students. For my students on the call, I challenge any faculty, any staff, the power you may have. And I know some staff might say, well, I'm just the low person on the totem pole, but you have power within your realm. Whether you're in Red's life, whether you're working as an academic advisor, you have power in your area that you own to impact students. There's a reason why a lot of us end up in this great field called student affairs. It was one individual, usually on campus, that you connected with, and you were like, can I do what they do? Because that's how I ended up in this great field. I had my hall director who kept telling me, Tierney, you're amazing, you do great jobs, but there's not enough people who look at you. And this was a white guy. Not enough people to look like you in this field right now. You need to consider it. I said, oh, Carl, you're cool, whatever. You know what I'm saying? I'm about to go out here and make all this money. That's what I want to do. That's the way we teach each other. Go out and make a lot of money, right? Yet, we can still be unhappy. Make all the money in the world, still be unhappy. I realized then I did exactly that. I went out and said, oh, I'm gonna work in corporate America, made good money, but I wasn't happy. What did make me happy? When I decided to roll in that Master's of Higher Education Administration class, in that first 2 classes I took, and I realized this is my calling. I realized that as Carl saw in me, I wasn't seeing. I saw the ability that I can have an impact on Black and brown students who look like me, because on my campus, I didn't see enough faculty and staff that looked like me. And the 1 or 2 that I did know, I was underneath their arms left and right. And so I realized I wanted to be that lean on shoulder, that individual that students can come to, that I can help them navigate this thing called life on a personal and professional tip. But not only that, I don't want it to be that faculty member that students that don't look like me would be engaged with as well. Because many of our students that don't look like me will come to a campus and they've grown up in a homogenous culture, and for the first time they might have an instructor, supervisor, or anybody that looks like me. So it's an opportunity for me to teach them, to educate them, to engage them in conversations that they normally wouldn't be engaged in growing up in that homogenous culture. So the power of activism is not only in our students, but it is us as staff and faculty. For the students, I would challenge you to do the things that need to be done to make Marymount University hold itself accountable. So who's all students on here? Raise your hand. Just Brianna? All right. Brianna and SJ, you are in charge right now. You are running this show. When you leave this call today, you need to rally the troops, and you need to go do some things, Brianna and SJ, to make sure everybody's at that center that Dean Barry has fought to get you guys at on that campus, and that we're talking about what's next. The center's just a start, but we need more. We need more, and it's important for us to do that. So I'm going to challenge you to understand where you come from. You come from a nonviolent background. You come from a student activist background. You come from a background that ethnic studies, African-American studies, that labor movements, that all kind of change has been on college campuses has come from students that are on this call or go to Marymount University. The question is, are you going to pick up the torch and run with it? Are you going to stand back? Because we know what the movements have been. She said, me too. And look how that started. That hashtag took off. They said, hashtag Black Lives Matter. And that hashtag now has created organizations, has created chapters of Black Lives Matter. Who's to say, Brianna, you don't come up with something today at Marymount that when you come back as an alum in 10 years will be so impactful that you and SJ are high-fiving saying, look what we did and the impact it's had at Marymount and on our student population. You know, you have the ability, unlike I did when I was in school, social media wasn't around, that you can literally go viral in 30 seconds and change so much. You've got Instagram, you've got Snapchat, now you got Clubhouse, you got all these other great things that are going on as far as that is concerned. And how are you going to use these tools to your advantage? I was able to tune in and see your great center just by Mr. Tate sending me the link for when you guys open up the center. These tools we have are the tools my grandfather didn't have. So how do we use them to our advantage? Think about that. They got over 100,000 people in 1963 on a march on Washington by picking up the phone and people just chartering buses. Imagine what you can do nowadays from Oregon, from DC, from Florida, just by the click of social media, just for your campus. And we know that. We know that. Now, I ain't trying to say that we got to do cancer culture for everybody, but we have to do something with the tools we have to have an impact. So I challenge what you will do to do stuff on your campus, Brianna. Will you say, hey, we're losing students because they can't afford it financially, where we're going to raise funds. We're going to talk to our administration of decreasing tuition or keeping tuition flat across the board for our students can stay and matriculate and graduate. What are you going to do to galvanize all the clubs and organizations together to do something around Black History Month? It shouldn't just be Black United Students. It shouldn't just be Dean Barry in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. It should be every fabric, whether it's faculty, staff, and students and other organizations doing stuff to celebrate. We got Women's History next month. What are we doing at Marymount University to celebrate women? Because if you look at this movement right now, it's led by women. It's always had women involved. You know, if you look at the 60s and the 50s and 70s, women have always been at the forefront of these movements. The difference nowadays is that women are the true faces, and that's the difference. You know, you had Dr. King, you had Ralph Abernathy, you had all these other individuals, Malcolm X, they were the faces. Now that face is you, Brianna. Now that face is someone that looks like Dean Barry or looks like Shannon. You are the face. Women, and particularly women of color, are leading these charges on these campuses and across the country. So it is our job, Tate, to make sure that we protect our women and make sure their voices are being heard, they're not harmed or in multiple different facets ways. It is our job to protect it better than they protected the Capitol on January 6th. Because it's important for us to understand that women will lead us into the future. We already know it. We got a Vice President called Kamala Harris, who hopefully one day will become the next president of the United States of America. And yet my daughter can look at that and say, I too can become. So it's important for us to understand that women have the power. Beyonce has always told us who runs the world. There you go. So it's important for us to understand that the future is you. So when you get in that good government job, Brianna, I want you to make sure that you go in there and do your due diligence, but you make sure that you bring people along with you. Don't just get in that good government job and just stand there and do your job. I want you to get in some good trouble, as John Lewis would say, and make sure that you bring other people along. I'm going to pause there because I said I want to get into questions. I want to make this a dialogue and not just me talking, but I truly feel the power of activism is at your fingertips at Marymount University as students. You don't know what you have until you exert that power.
Yes.
One thing that came in my mind as she was talking was just my personal experience here at Marymount and what I have went through. I feel as if sometimes it's hard for us to continue or try to create a momentum with such little small individuals behind you who are on the same page and wants to also foster change.
You know, a movement, Brianna, starts with just a few. Mm-hmm. You know, you think about when I just mentioned the hashtags, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, were all hashtags that blew up. What you have to realize is this work ain't easy. It ain't for the faint of heart, but you have to bring people along with you. You know, Harry Belafonte, I had an opportunity to meet him. He said one of the biggest things they messed up on after the civil rights movement is that they didn't bring in the next generation in the house. You know, they kind of went into this burning house, but didn't pull others in afterwards. So they finally got in the house, he said, and it was like, oh, you know, let's go ahead and start putting up, you know, the furniture and everything like that. But they invited nobody else into the house with them. They didn't invite the next generation behind them. And so what you get is a lot of them, like John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, all those individuals we lost in 2020 are dying off, yet they never groomed the next generation to be prepared to carry the torch. A prime example of a school that does a great job of that is Northwestern University. They can go back to the 1960s to all their leadership of their leadership student organizations. Every homecoming, they bring them all together to say, hey, I am the president of BSU. I am the president of the LGBT group. They bring them all back together where they can pass that lineage down. My school, where I went to school, University of Akron, we're doing that right now through our alumni association. We're starting to finally gather the information for we can say when students come through on orientation or throughout the academic year that they're on campus, this is the history that we want to share. So if we think about Black History Month, there should be something here at Marymount that talks about the history of Blacks, not only being the first student, but the student clubs, organizations, impact, faculty that is taught to everyone. And not just during Black History Month. Of course, that's a great month to start, but throughout the academic year. We're going into Women's History Month next month, and then Asian Pacific Islander. What are we doing as far as these months are concerned to make sure that our students know and are educated? We got these first year study courses on a lot of our campuses, right? A portion of that should be that. I love the way I worked at North Carolina Central University, HBCU, because that's what they did. A portion of their fourth year class was teaching the history of the institution. So you can walk up to a student and say, when was the institution founded? Who was the founder? What are our principles? What does our motto mean? And Dean Barry knows what I'm talking about as far as that's concerned. When students can know that look like you, Brianna, and students who don't look like you know that, then we're starting to move somewhere.
Okay. Another thing that just came to my mind was that we do have our Discover courses, which is in place to try to do that and to try to create that sense of having them more accustomed to Marymount and its history. But I feel like sometimes the disconnect is that generally a lot of kids obviously like, and I think this is everywhere as well, students obviously don't pick their, choice of university most of the time. So, because like for the history, they may do it because, oh, I'm an athlete, or, hey, they just offered me a lot of money. And it's hard to kind of engage that and kind of get them more involved in the university. So I guess.
Why did you pick Marymount?
Location. I'm from a very rural county in Southern Virginia, and I knew that what I wanted to do with IT and coding, I wasn't gonna really get a job surrounded by tobacco fields. So the closest, biggest city was DC. So it's like I was always looking at Northern Virginia, DC colleges, and then I came across Marymount. It was small. I didn't want to be at a big university. Kind of wanted to stand out at more of a smaller university. But everyone has like the same reasons why they chose Marymount, but then sometimes the energy and the aura and like the excitement's just not there when they get here to make change. It's more just
I'm gonna survive.
Where the problems are fixed.
Yeah, you're gonna survive. See, that's the issue with our campuses. We're surviving. We get there because you just told me why you came there. Hey, I want to be in a big city. I want to do IT and coding, all this other great stuff. I want a small campus. But now you're telling me you're surviving there. You're not, are you thriving? See, we gotta go from surviving to thriving at our institutions. And for a lot of students right now, they don't understand why they come to college. Let's be real there too. You just told me what you want to do as far as I'm concerned. A lot of students tell me what they want to do, get to college, and still are trying to figure out. There's nothing wrong with it, as I tell people. But that's the beauty of college. The beauty of college is what you make it. If you stay there 5 years or 6 years, it's still what you make it. Because it's not only what you learn inside the classroom, it's what you learn outside of the classroom as well. That's why I majored in outside of the classroom. That was my major. Because I tell people it was important for me that I learned just as much outside of the classroom as I did inside of the classroom. The networks, the individuals I came in contact. I used to meet with my president when I was on my college campus in some regards and was put on certain committees to be engaged with. And it was important for me to be there because I knew as a Black student, I wanted to be in spaces that there was not always people like me where I can go back and tell others, you need to be involved, you need to be engaged, and here's our opportunities for you to be that way. Now I get what you're saying. There's that empathy and sometimes that ability for students to just go through the monotony of being in college. But that's the thing. We have to get out of that because we have not created an atmosphere where students can truly thrive and challenge some of our status quos and our normalized ways of doing things in higher education as a whole. So they're coming to Miramar like, oh, I want to major in this, or Miramar gave me the most money, or I'm on a basketball scholarship as far as that's concerned. Well, then we got to turn that narrative. Yes, you're on a basketball scholarship. Yes, you got the most money to come here. But what are you going to do with it? Because if you leave an institution after 4 years with just saying I got a degree, then you missed out on the true education.
Okay, another question that I had was, as being like an involved student leader and stuff, and sometimes you put forth these initiatives or these ideas, and you from like an administrative side, you know, sometimes obviously things get denied. We say no. How can you continue and keep firing back after being told no so many times? Or like, yeah, this is a great idea, but, and then it's like a second half to it.
You know what that second half becomes, as I tell a lot of people, and Dean Barry probably can speak to this. Tell me why it was a no. Give me factual information of why it was a no. And then I'm going to take that along with playing devil's advocate, along with getting some other colleagues and faculty members across campus on a case study around that no. And then I'm going to turn that no into a yes. I'm going to come back with so many things, you know what I'm saying, that you told me the reason why, and I'm going to come back with why we can do it based upon the no factors you gave me. So I'll give you an example. They might say we can't do it because we don't have budget. Okay. What kind of budget would it take to do this? You know, a lot of people say, oh, we don't have a budget, can't do it. Okay. What if it only cost me $1,000? Oh, wait, we were at a great college. We've got alumni. What if our alumni would be willing to donate for this cause? Or what are part of our advancement? We have a conversation to say next year we want to do something, raise $50,000 just for grants to help support students in their matriculation process. That's not coming out of university money. That is an opportunity to fundraise and students be involved, alumni can be involved, community members can be involved as far as that's concerned. So funding is one thing that we're always going to try to cut you guys at the knees out. Second thing is we don't have the manpower. We don't have the people. Well, I'll tell you this. A lot of us in this great space called higher education could run circles around many people doing multiple jobs. A lot of us aren't doing completely our whole job. In this pandemic, we've seen people who are in certain roles who could do more. So why can't we change job descriptions or pivot to say, you know what, Tate, that ain't your blessing. You need to be over here doing this. And what the students brought forth to us, I think you'll be a great fit for. I'm willing to relieve and change your job duties to give you 30% of the time to work on this thing that we're coming up with the students on. And then I don't have to go out and hire somebody, but it also makes Tate look good because Tate has the skill sets and he gets the ability to lead that in working with our students. See, every time we have a no, Brianna, there's ways to get around that no. And there's the people just gonna say no because they don't want to hear your idea and they just don't want to do it. And that's the reality we have to deal with as well. Some people just gonna say no because they don't want to get into it because that's holding them accountable for something. And that's what you want to get to, Brianna. You want to say, let me look at all my options. Let me throw everything out on the table. Let's pivot. Let's think through this as a design think model and use that to our advantage and say, we figured it all out. Here's all the no's they're going to give us. No's around budget, no's around people, no about space, no about this. And we figured all those no's out. So when you walk back in there that second time around, can't be a no. I had a staff do that to me when I worked at the University of Louisville. Excuse me. I told him, here's all my no objectives. This is why I'm saying no. You come back with a thorough presentation to me to get me to say yes. And he was able to do it.
I want to chime in just a bit. Sorry, I also want to highlight that Brianna Johnson was one of our coordinators, one of the lead coordinators for our first ever Black, at least to my knowledge, the first ever Black Lives Matter rally that happened on our campus last October. And in the midst of the pandemic, there was about roughly 85 people in attendance that comprised the student, faculty, and staff outside. And it was the first ever. And Brianna led that, her and one of her peers, who is another community assistant as well. And so it was awesome to see. It was wonderful. I think that for me, as a professional staff member who, very similar to you, Dr. Bates, I've worked at institutions, my last institution was California State Los Angeles, where They have the second oldest ethnic studies program right after San Francisco State, right? And they, within their institution, they breathe protests, right? Like they want students to show, you know, their activism spirit and their voice and using their power. And so for me, while there, you know, prior to that, I was at Fordham in New York, where it's the total opposite. So there, I was kind of like, so when I got to LA, they were like, yeah, let the students do it. Let them occupy the president's office. I was like, what? I was like, and so when I get here, where, you know, again, I was groomed in that, to have that manner, I now, as a professional staff member, am feeling restricted to a degree now where, you know, we're a smaller Catholic institution and we want to be, you know, we're proper, we're situated in a beautiful area, multi-million-dollar homes are near us, so we don't want to be too loud and things like that. And so, but as a professional staff member who identifies with many of the identities that are at stake here, right? Like folks are dying in the streets that look like me, right? Folks are dying who look like Brianna in the streets and at home, right? Sleeping in their beds, right? And so when you find that your colleagues may not have the same mindset as you, right? Or they may not have the same vigor when it comes to these topics, because we want to, yeah, we'll give them the rally, but we don't want them to disturb the folks in the main house. No shame to anybody, right? But like, we don't want them to go too far. We'll give them this, but we don't want to go too far, right? So I guess my question is, how do you combat when activism is being policed?
So that's a great one, Tate. And that's the problem, right? That's the problem with higher education. It's just your institution. You know, the schools on the West Coast have always been very active in the power of activism, right? As far as if you look at the history of activism, that's typical. If you remember, you're the lawyer, Dean Barry. What's the case against Alabama A&M? I think it is Alabama State. It's the one case that's the processor that set the tone in conduct in higher education, where students went to protest back in the 60s. The governor told the president to throw them students out, threw the students out as far as that is concerned, because they went out into the good community. And yet the students ended up suing the institution and winning because they never got their due process. That's what it originally was, as far as that's concerned. I say that to say that I was raised Catholic, so I know exactly 100% what you're talking about. Lived in a Catholic neighborhood with Catholic churches, the whole nine. And a school like Miramar is prestigious, right? You're prestigious, use that word. And so you don't want to ruffle the good folks' feathers, but you have to. Here's a kicker in the head I tell people. I was in this conversation earlier today. You know, when we seen the protests back in the summer, I was laughing. I'm like, why are all the people in the downtowns and in the hood? They need to be out in the suburbs, because that's when the people gonna really listen. So on your campus, Brianna, you need to be outside the campus, because that's when people will truly start listening. And I know, Tate, that's a hard one because you work there at the institution, as far as that's concerned. Just dust off your resume, all the other great stuff. But it's a hard one for the simple fact we know that when you live around communities with $1 million homes, they just want to keep the good folk quiet. But yet they're the reason why we're in these situations we're in and why we can't breathe. So it's important for us to understand that we have to be the agitators. Agitators are the ones people hate, but the agitators are the ones who are going to change the status quo and move an organization forward. So I would recommend you go into the community, because guess what? Your board of trustees, your president, your leadership will act quickly to, start trying to police, but you got to tell them, you can't police me. I'm free. I'm free. I pay as a student. Read your student conduct handbook, Brianna, and any student on the call tonight. Read your conduct in your handbook. Then you go out and you go live your free life, right? That is the importance of it all. We are all free. And so for me to stand on a soapbox on the corner of whatever street it is near your university with a bullhorn saying, they're not doing it, I have the freedom to do that. And so it's important for us to understand that when you start policing my freedoms, and that's how I would term it, because guess what, in America, when we talk about our freedoms, everybody will say, oh no, you take away my freedoms. What you think January 6th was? We taking away their freedoms, they were saying. Guess what? It's cool to take away my freedom, but when I come for your freedom, it's a different story. And that's what we have to have a conversation around. Because you want to take away my freedom, you want to police my freedoms, but if I come for yours, you're gonna be like, well, wait a minute. So again, it is the act of us going at. I laugh, like I said, I'm still telling people, Why y'all marching downtown? Go march in the suburbs. In Louisville, Kentucky, where I used to live, I used to tell them, why y'all marching downtown? You know, he ain't paying attention. The Mayor Fisher ain't paying attention. That means you go out to St. Matt's, where I used to live at. Now you go out to St. Matt's. It was two different things there in Louisville. If you paid attention to those summer riots over Breonna Taylor, please let them do whatever they want to do downtown. Please just stand there because the headquarters is downtown. I lived in Louisville. Just let them do whatever they want to do. They marched up and down the street. They went to the West End, which is a predominantly Black community. It was fine. As soon as that group said, "No, we headed to St. Matt's," because they did do this, man, the whole police force, it was roadblocks. It was all kind of officers out there as far as that's concerned. They tricked them and went to a different location as far as that is concerned, because you know everybody trying to follow everybody on social media. And so they had to be slick about it from that perspective. And they showed up in the, and I'm just going to say it, the Lily White community, and started protesting there. Now, of course, it pissed off people like, why y'all here? We ain't the problem. Yes, you are. Because you're not a accomplished. You're not even an actor or ally, as I like to say. You're literally helping the status quo grow, that more and more people like me are dying based upon these systematic racism things. And so that's a whole nother conversation that I've seen some true communities try to grapple with. There was a survey that was put out about diverse communities for Blacks and whites. White people said a diverse community is 80% white, 20% Black. Black people said a diverse community is 50-50. And there's a reason why, because the way we look at diversity. Diversity for my colleagues that don't look like me a lot of times is, we got Tierney, we got Brooke, we got Tate. There we go, we diverse. You know what I'm saying? No. And not only does that diversity part come into play, it comes into play with our social economics. I just told you, 80% of the school students in Durham are Black, yet the city is 72% white. So there's something that is not connecting there. Even where I live at right now, I live in a brand new neighborhood, and I laugh because when we first moved here, I was like, we probably won't be the only Black people, as I was telling my wife. And we started chuckling about it. Well, we shocked. Our neighbors, 3 neighbors across the street, 2 new neighbors just moved in, another neighbor's coming. I'm like, I don't think we haven't had when I say it's a new community, like literally we were one of the first to move in, so they're still building up. There's a second half of the community that's not even done yet. We still don't have our pool house and workout facility up yet. It's supposed to come this summer, finally. But I laugh because they had a community outing, and some people showed up, some people didn't show up as far as that's concerned. The next time they had that outing, it's going to be totally different because we're bringing the barbecue to the outing. And it's going to be important for us to understand that what that's going to look like from a lens of a community that literally is trying to price people out.
One thing that came to mind was that I took a course here at Miramar about social change and whatnot, and how to kind of create it. And one of the takeaways that I had from the class was there's a breakdown in order to make a social change. And it's primarily comprised of 3 things: an organized infrastructure, political opportunity, and engaged individuals. And I think sometimes we struggle at all 3, but one of the ones that I think we struggle at the most is engaged individuals. So how can we get other students who don't see or care about the problems to want to help make the change?
You got to find out who's your allies and who's your accomplices. You also realize that your generation, the iGen, Gen Z, is a selfish me generation. There's a reason why you guys are always on this great cell phone and doing like this. Ooh, I just ate some good food, all that stuff. It's about you. And that's shifted. Because when I was in school, it was about we. We were like, we trying to survive up in here. We about to go up and march on the president's office. We about to have spades tournament night, all this other stuff. That is so much because of this. This is the greatest tool you have, but also the greatest curse. Because you guys are so disconnected as far as interpersonal skills, as far as to finding out what people truly care for. And then at the same time, you'll post everything and talk about everything on this great device. Yet, again, I told you earlier, use this device as a tool to get some of the things you need done. So there's some people on Miramount's campus that care. They might not want to be the face, Brianna. Tate said you had 85 people show up. There was probably another 100, 200 that want to back you. There's something in them that said, I can't be out there right now. But girlfriend, whatever you need me to do, I can do. And that's the key of true leadership. Because you got to have your rah-rah folks. You got to have your folks that are in the background doing certain things. And you got to have your silent killers, as I like to say. They're in the rooms and spaces, not saying anything, but they're infiltrating. So it's important for you to understand who are those actors, who are those allies, and who are those accomplices. And those are the three you need to have. The actors are going to be in the room, listening, bringing stuff back to you. The allies, they're going to be the ones that's tweeting, saying certain things, backing you up, and you know who. And there's the accomplices like, okay, girl, when we get arrested, the bail money is coming from such and such, such and such. You know, when you got to go see the dean of students, you know, I got your back. I'm going to be a witness. All this other great stuff. That's what you got to understand. See, everything you just learned in that class is great. I always tell people, you got to organize, strategize, and actualize. What your generation is missing is the actualization. Y'all can strategize and organize, but y'all not actualizing enough where you're willing to die on the hill for something. No, go ahead, get kicked out of Miramar. I'll accept you at UNC Chapel Hill. We got a brand too. Everybody know about Chapel Hill.
Yeah. I know we have a couple other students.
Go ahead.
No, so we have a couple other students. SJ, Eric, did you want to ask anything or share anything about your experiences, questions?
I would love to hear your experiences, SJ and Eric.
That last question actually came from SJ. I just didn't want to mention her name.
See, SJ
no
is
more
your
questions. It was great having this conversation with you, Dr. Bates. I hope everyone on the call was able to take something away from this. And again, it was just lovely having you. It was a great dialogue and conversation. Definitely worth the time. And then take it away.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you to you, Tate, Dean Barry, and everyone that was on the call tonight. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Please add me. You can follow me on Instagram at tbates1914 as well. I think it's important that use individuals that are not also at your campus. I can be your ally and accomplice from Chapel Hill. I don't necessarily have to be on your campus. I actually follow your president on LinkedIn. We follow each other as far as that's concerned. You realize the same thing you're experiencing, some of my students are experiencing. So there's also students at George Mason, over at George Washington, over at UDC, all these other schools that are experiencing similar things. Where is that opportunity to build a coalition around the DMV, Northern Virginia area, to say, we're standing up at Miramar, we're standing up at George Mason, we're standing up at George Washington, we're standing up at these schools together in solidarity around these issues and doing certain things that you're going to impact their campus, your campus, and everything like that. I keep telling you, the power of activism is in the palm of your hands as students.
So much, Dr. Bates. I see you just dropped your Instagram. Is that your Instagram or LinkedIn?
Instagram.
Okay. And on LinkedIn, you're just Tierney Bates?
Tierney Bates, yep.
Okay. Awesome. Yes, so we appreciate you so much, and thank you for spending some time with us. We are definitely going to follow you on Instagram and LinkedIn and keep in contact with you as a ally, but also as a consultant, and just to keep us right, because the movement doesn't stop. You know, we know, unfortunately, this is the country that we live in, but we know that something's just going to happen again, right? And so this conversation continues, and to actualize what we are learning and what we are passionate about to make it institutionalized, make it a part of our culture right here at Millennials University. So again, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining. I know that some folks have late classes on Thursdays, but we recorded it, and so we're going to put this on our webpage and make sure that students and faculty and staff will have access to it. So tonight, actually, the D&I Center is open, late hours. I'm here right now. Our grad assistant just walked in, Danielle. So we have snacks, we have hot cocoa. I know it's chilly. And so if you just want to stop by and just drop in, we're super excited to just welcome some of the students, say hello, and show them the center and things like that. So we'll be here to roughly 11 o'clock. We got plenty of snacks and things like that. Shannon, real quick, would you just announce about tomorrow, Lunar Year? I wanted to put you on the spot, but that's a big celebration as well for tomorrow.
Thank you so much. And so, Ministry and Spiritual Life, Global Engagement, Asian Students Union, and International Club, we're having a Spiritual Diversity Day. We're celebrating Lunar New Year tomorrow from 4:30 to 7. And, you know, look at the posters. We have a QR code. Or on Engage, sign up on Sign Up Genius. It's a 20-minute slot. You'll get a red envelope, and that'll have your meal ticket, some fun facts about Lunar New Year, some yummy candy. We have a craft for creating some luminary lanterns, and then you'll go to your exit our indoor space and then go to our Korean barbecue taco food truck. So I know, right? And so your meal ticket's in your red envelope. We can't, usually it's cash for Lunar New Year. So we're not doing that, but we're giving something even better, some yummy Korean barbecue. So come on by. It's going to be a great time, and it's going to be super safe. So, you know, please, please sign up. You have to sign up though before you come. So thanks so much, Tate.
Thank you again for everyone joining us tonight. And so, as we say in the Black church, if all hearts and minds are clear, as I look at my supervisor, am I missing anything?
No, benediction. Keep
it
going.
The doors of the church are open.
That's right. So, but you gave us a good word. Is there one? Right. Thank you all so much. And until then, we'll see you soon. Everyone stay safe and stay warm. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.